Hey everybody, today is Monday, November 14th, 2022. Coming up on the show today, from the Banshees of Inisherin, editor Mikkel E.G. Nielsen.
I know, and I've done it many times now, that the first assembly is pure structure and story. Let's see what we have. I would never take anything out. I would always put everything together as it's supposed to be. And then after 2 or 3 weeks of just putting material after each other, looking at it, I start editing. I don't really think at all. It's more about the natural way of putting things together. I had an idea what would happen, and it never really happened. It always took a completely different turn, which was super intriguing.
Yes, all that and much more in this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, a top of the morning to you, Rough Cutters, or top of the evening. Whatever time of day you're listening to this, put a top on it. Why the Irish greeting, you ask? Because we are talking about an Irish movie today, a very Irish movie. The Banshees of Inisherin, starring Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson as two friends who suddenly one day aren't friends anymore. Seems like a simple enough story, right? But in many, many ways, those simple stories can be some of the hardest to tell. The editor ultimately tasked with helping writer-director Martin McDonagh with crafting this tale is Danish editor Mikkel Nielsen. Cinematographer Ben Davis and composer Carter Burwell, as well as other McDonagh regulars, were on hand once again for the Banshees of Inisherin, but Mikkel was the new face on the crew. Not to worry, because Mr. Nielsen definitely knows his way around editing drama, and that skill certainly came in hand on a film like The Banshees of Inisherin. There's no big action set pieces, no top 40 needle drops, no CGI wizardry, well, not much anyway. Not a lot of characters to work with. The film in many ways could be compared to a play, which is how director Martin McDonagh first made a name for himself. His big break in filmmaking came with his film In Bruges, which also starred Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson. But that's kind of where the similarities end. In Bruges was a very different movie from Banshees. Now let me give you a little summary on Banshees in case you haven't seen it. It takes place in the 1920s during the Irish Civil War on a small island off the coast of Ireland. As you would imagine, there aren't a lot of people on this island, and life consists of pretty basic, routine activities to get the islanders through the day. All one really has is their family, their friends, their animals, and the pub for a daily pint. The main character in the film is Pádraic, played by Colin Farrell. He lives on the island with his sister Siobhan, who is played by Kerry Condon. Pádraic's best friend is a fellow named Colm, who is played by Brendan Gleeson. Yes, Pádraic and Colm are friends, until one day Colm decides they aren't. He isn't satisfied anymore spending his days at the pub having mindless chatter with the relatively simple Pádraic. He decides his time would be better spent working on his music and his poetry. So he tells Pádraic to get lost, which is pretty hard to do on an island. Plus, Pádraic doesn't really take him seriously at first. And when he does actually get the message, he does everything he can to get Colm to reconsider, which angers his former friend, to the point that Colm tells Pádraic, if you keep bothering me, I'm going to cut off my fingers until you stop, which is a pretty aggressive stance, I think you'll agree. One that not only troubles Pádraic, but knocks the rest of the villagers for a loop as well. Without Colm's friendship, Pádraic has to turn to hanging out with Dominic, a villager even more dull and simple than Pádraic. And I should add that Dominic is played delightfully by Irish actor Barry Keoghan. So it's a high-concept story. Leave me alone or I'll cut off my fingers. But it's also a simple story. And please don't mistake my describing the film as simple as me being pejorative. It is a fantastic story. It just doesn't have a lot of plot mechanics or story logic to be worked through. Or maybe it does. I don't know. I'm no expert. But Mikkel Nielsen is, especially on the topic of this film. So we will turn to him for the answers. But before that, let us get some expert advice on how you can make sure your next film or TV project has the best production audio you could ever want. And when you want the best in production audio, because like I always say, why would you want the worst? You need to call our friends and Rough Cut sponsor Extreme Music. Filmmakers and TV makers and media makers of all sorts have trusted Extreme Music to be their sonic solution for 25 years. And why do they choose Extreme Music? Well, it all starts with the talent, of course. Extreme Music boasts a roster of A-list names from the world of producing and composing. And from that roster comes a vast catalog of tracks that you can customize right down to the length and instrumentation. Maybe you're making an Irish film like The Banshees of Inisherin. You can adjust your tracks so you have fiddle or no fiddle, harp or no harp, flute or no flute. You get the idea. You can also customize your searches based on tempo, genre, lyrics, and more. And if you want to speed your search along, you can even use Extreme Music's reference track technology where you give them a track and they go find you one like it. They make it so easy to find what you want, and then they help you with all that boring licensing stuff. That way you can get back to the fun of making a cool movie with their great music. So the next time you need to make a cool movie or TV show, go see our friends at Extreme Music. Okay, time to set sail for Inisherin, that imaginary little island off the coast of Ireland. Meeting us there is Oscar-winning editor Mikkel Nielsen. Maybe you're not a genius, but you make great movies, so let's start there.
Thank you so much.
So the last time we spoke, believe it or not, was 2 years ago for Sound of Metal. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know how much I love that movie.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people love that movie because you got an Oscar and a BAFTA for Best Film Editing. And of course, here we are in its award season again. And guess what? We're talking about another Mikkel Nielsen film, The Banshees of Inisherin, which is also drawing a lot of critical acclaim and awards buzz. But before we get right into this new film, I would like to ask, go back 2 years ago and ask about your experience winning those awards, especially the Oscar, because that was like the pandemic Oscar where they had the Oscars at a train station.
Yeah.
I can't help but think that whole experience played a part in you being on Banshees.
I mean, that was quite a surprise because, as you know, I come from Denmark and our world is that we can maybe do a film which will go to the Oscars for Best Foreign Film, but it will always be the film and not so much the craft. So it just really took me and the whole production by surprise. And I'm extremely grateful that people got to see the film and that they also like the editing and the sound and what we tried to do, because we tried to craft something different. And it was just a very special experience for me.
It was a very special film, and so is this one. I have to tell you, this was a hard film for me to study, to analyze, because once it was over, I looked down at my notebook that I carried all these films, and there weren't a lot of notes. And the ones that were, and that's generally a good thing. And the ones that were there were just big idea notes.
Yeah.
Which made me think that if, for me, this film is a hard film to break down and study, it had to be a challenging story to tell, at least as gracefully as you did. So I think a lot of my questions are going to be about the challenge of telling such a simple story without a big plot, without big action set pieces, without a lot of characters. And for you as an editor, really having no place to hide, so to speak. We should just start at the beginning and talk about meeting Martin McDonagh, because I don't think you've worked with him before, and the interview process with him.
I only had one meeting with Martin at a restaurant. I read the script. I really liked the script a lot. And we just met to see how we would, the chemistry. And we didn't really talk about the film. We were more talking about who we are as persons and personality and if we could work together. And by the end, he offered me the job and I said, thank you. I would love to do it. But I was also very, it was a challenge for me because I've never tried to do comedy and drama before this way. It's like either or. And I was really drawn to the whole idea of trying to find a balance between comedy and drama and going from, and then he told me that he wanted to create this beautiful, very sad film. And I was actually very drawn to that because I laughed so much when I read the script myself, but I also felt that there was a lot at stake for the characters. And it's basically all character, right? Us working with film. And that goes for Sound of Metal as well. And it's always how I would work, to try and create these characters and find the balance and the humanity in the actors. Martin's extremely gifted scriptwriter and coming from theater world. And I know that a lot of people have seen his theater work and his films. I didn't know so much about the theater, but I was just really drawn to this project. But I also have to say that it came on a very sad note because I wasn't supposed to do this film. This was supposed to be Jon Gregory, who is normally his editor. But unfortunately, Jon Gregory died right before production. And they reached out to me and asked if I would step in, then work with his team or his assistant. And everyone was just really very nice and caring and trying to make me as comfortable as possible. And I knew that it was a special situation and I was invited into. So I was also very honored to be asked. And I knew of Jon Gregory's work and I knew of him as a storyteller and how he worked with characters. I've seen so many of his films. So I really wanted to honor him and also try to see if this was something that I could actually do or try. So that's how it all started.
Well, I mean, for a job that's already so complicated, that has got to be a very delicate situation to enter into.
Yeah.
You used the word chemistry in talking about meeting with Martin. This is his second film with Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, the first being In Bruges.
Yeah.
Very different movies, clearly. But for you, would you, whether you had seen it before or not, would you watch In Bruges to get a sense of Martin's style and also the chemistry between Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson?
Yes and no, because I knew there was a lot of love for the film, but I also knew that it was kind of very different in tone and style from, at least from what I read. And I also got to see a few dailies and after the talk. So I knew that there was something special about these characters, but every film is its own and has its own language. And I actually found it super interesting that Martin, as a scriptwriter and director, creates a new world where everyone talked about how much they loved these two actors together. And the first thing he opens up with is a breakup, them separating. And somehow it might be that if you've seen In Bruges and love In Bruges, then you already have ideas of the relationship, even though this is a completely different story and completely different characters, all these things. But I just found the hook or the opening, the way to get me as an audience intrigued by meeting this very happy person going knocking on a door, doing this day by day, every day, and then suddenly someone is just not reacting. And I saw everything through his eyes. And remember when we talked about Sound of Metal, it had the same idea of POV or being with your main character. And how do you stay and see things? And we know as much about this situation as our main character does. So we get invested and interested just the way he does. We experience things the way he does. We see that the whole community or village is like, have you been rowing? Have you been, and he's like, no, I don't think we have. What's wrong? And you start questioning yourself, what's wrong? To the point where this guy just says, well, I just don't like you anymore. You're like, what? How can you say that to a person? And then you're like, what is this other person? What's his thing? So it was just to try and really find, with Martin, find this balance of comedy and drama. And he's so good at it in his other films. He knows exactly what he likes, but he's also extremely open and very well prepared, which was super interesting in the edit, because we would sit, after I did a first assembly, we would sit together like from the morning, get in, and we would be very focused. And he would have taken notes on all the dailies and all the takes and like write down what line he likes from the different takes and what they do, like tonality. Is it high? Is it low? Where is the character? And then we would try all these things. And it was a really interesting way for me to work and also to get to know what Martin liked and to see everything from that perspective and try all the different takes. And then we just took it from there little by little, like molding it and shaping it and finding a rhythm after we found that structure of the whole film.
The film takes place in the 1920s on a small island, a made-up one, off the coast of Ireland during the Irish Civil War. Ireland itself is a character in the film. The Irish sensibility is a character in the film. In fact, Barry Keoghan, who plays the character Dominic in the film, I was watching an interview with him and he was asked to describe the movie. And he said, well, it's Irish, very Irish. And of course, Mikkel, you are a Danish editor, a very Danish editor. Knowing that, did you find it difficult at all to get into the mindset of this film, the sense of humor, the sense of irony, the sense of despair, these qualities that are often very different in different cultures?
No, I didn't find it difficult at all, actually. But I would say that there's a similarity in humor, in dry humor and in dark humor, like Danish and Irish. So I found it like really funny. We had a lot of laughs and we had a really good time working on the film, Martin and I and my sister Nicola. But also, of course, given that it's so Irish, also the way they deliver the lines, I would have to lean towards Martin a lot, of course. Is this better than this? Or what is it? So I would probably more look at the faces and the eyes than how you deliver the line in some of the parts. And then I would lean up against Martin, who said that like this is the best way because he knows Irish, of course. And then I could somehow relax a little bit and see it a little bit from a distance and from outside. And potentially that was a very good way to work. We never had any issues with it at all. I didn't. Maybe Martin had and didn't say it. I don't know.
We'll get him on and we'll ask him.
Yeah, maybe he was just very nice.
You mentioned a couple of times the delicate balance of comedy and drama.
Yeah.
I think you said as you read the script, it was very funny to you.
Yeah.
Is that something that working with Martin, you struggled, might not be the right word, but struggled with in terms of, well, now we're getting too broad in the comedy. It's too funny. And at the end of the day, these are very serious themes we're working with.
For me, his scripts are like a music piece. If you add the actors and the pauses and the way they play them and the way the camera moves and the settings and surroundings and the set designs and all these things, it almost make you play like these music pieces in the dialogue. And then it's about finding that balance of it and when to have a small pause or how long do you have a pause. Find the small nuances in all these characters and then try and create the scenes as elegant as possible. And also to try and balance the comedy and the drama and the characters.
How do you describe this film in terms of what it is about or what themes it touches upon?
Well, a simple way is to say that it's a very sad breakup story. So by that, you try to find the simplicity and see how little information do you need to understand this whole story. And then the complexity starts. Martin's script does have a lot of nuances and a lot of other ideas in it, and especially all the settings as well, because the nature, the island, the civil war, when it's taking place, the animals, the characters around it, they just add little by little. And what's interesting is that I have one way of seeing it, and then I talk to you and you probably have a different way of seeing it, because we're trying to also put our own stuff into the characters. I get a sense that I have a little bit of Pádraic in myself and a little bit of Colm. And then I have a lot of love for a character like Dominic, and I have a lot of love for a character like Siobhan. So how do I protect them and how do I treat them like real humans? And then see how far can we take this? It's interesting with this film because what Martin's intention was to make this beautiful Irish film. And I actually really feel that Ben Davies and Martin and the actors and the set designs and the production and all these things, they've really, really, really used the island amazingly. And it looks fantastic. The whole way that everyone just, what they put into their craft was just phenomenal.
Do you find this kind of story more challenging to execute without that really defined plot mechanism where we have to get from A to B to C and make sure they defuse the bomb before the third act is over? When you don't have that to rely upon, and for you, it's more about hitting the exact right emotional notes and not just wrapping up the film in a tidy little bow. Films like these don't really resolve so much on a big beat. It sort of leaves the audience thinking. Is that more challenging for you as an editor when you don't have that really rigid story structure in place?
Well, I feel that it has a structure, and I think it's very unpredictable, which I really, really liked. I had an idea what would happen, and it never really happened. It always took a completely different turn, which was super intriguing when I read the script. So I always knew that, okay, this is just going to take steps and changes which I didn't even think of. Because I would think that this is going to be about this or this or this, or put so much of my own stories into this. That's how I felt. I don't know about you. I mean, I think that it's very unpredictable, and it's also not a very slow movie, actually. So what we did do, just to have moments where you think for yourself, we created these small montages where you bring the island and the animals into it, and with music pieces in between. The idea was to have it almost like a fable or fairy tale. You go through the clouds and you find this character and you go with him, and then you follow all these strange characters. And it's funny, but more and more sad. And you have a feeling that everyone is a little bit insane, and the only sane persons are actually the animals or the heart of the movie, which is Siobhan. And then somehow you just leave it again. that was the circle to try and see, can we do that? And then we then find that rhythm and balance of it all together with the music. Martin already had like 3 or 4 music pieces that he really wanted to use for the film. And we tried it on and it really, really worked well. The whole opening, which is like a choir. And then there's some Brahms lieder, which we use in the film. And then Carter would also create this glockenspiel harp universe that almost also makes it like a playful, but also melancholy and sad, and very far from like traditional Irish music or film that you normally see. That was very important, that it gets its own world. And then we also created this whole, it's almost, I mean, we, as a temp score, we used this Indonesian music that Martin had, which is a gamelan, which just sounded so strange, and you almost disconnected with the characters. And for a long time we thought about should we keep it, but then Carter came up with a beautiful piece for some of the montages that we started using, where he took some of the elements of what we had already used and he created his own with the themes of like friendship or island, and that created something even more interesting working with the film.
You put into words much better than I just did what I was trying to get to. And that was, I kept talking about it's not a plot-rich story and it doesn't resolve. I think what I really should have keyed in on was story logic. In a lot of films, as an editor, as a storyteller, you have to be very careful that certain events roll out in a linear fashion and the audience understands all the necessary info. And in Banshees, it felt like for you it was almost better to give the audience less information because it's more powerful for them to fill in those blanks. There are characters in the film, Pádraic's sister Siobhan and his sort of friend Dominic. Those 2 characters both make, for them, painful choices to change their respective destinies.
Mm.
In another film, they might have these big monologues or have big scenes declaring their intentions. But for Banshees, the audience gets some clues and a little context, but when those changes ultimately happen, the audience has to sort of write that part of the script for themselves, which I felt was a very powerful way to tell this story and probably a big part of why it's moved people the way it has.
Mm.
Could you tell me a little bit about that approach and any discussions you might have had with Martin about how much do we really want to give the audience in these situations versus let them come to their own conclusions about what went on in these characters' minds?
No, we didn't really talk so much about it. And to be honest, it's pretty much the script. I mean, we did work a lot with them, as you know, just is it too much, or there was a lot of options to should it be a little bit more, should it have another round, should it have in the dialogue scene, but it went pretty fast to find the right structure for everything. And then we had a few ways to have more background for the characters, but we felt that sometimes it was better maybe just to stay on track with where our characters are right now in the moment. So we kind of took out a few things which isn't really important. I don't know. I mean, it came very fluently the way Martin wanted to tell this story, but he also was very much open to me, like trying things in scenes. So it's not like we didn't try a lot, but I always felt that the structure and everything, we didn't really change a lot of structure in the film. We took things out because less sometimes is more. It's somehow also interesting how you can activate the audience in a thing by not giving information or by having you like invest in the story and ask questions. And then it's super interesting what the laugh does, especially if you're with an audience in a cinema and you see it together, and how much that affects everyone's way to look at. Because if someone laughs at this, then you also suddenly open up and you start laughing about it, and you just see it differently with their eyes. And then suddenly you change the whole scene, and what you're laughing about becomes very serious. And it's like, wait a second, can I really laugh at this? You're already like putting guilt on yourself.
You know, you talked about Martin giving you the freedom to try different things and also sort of checking in with him about like, how does this feel to you with these lines that they're delivering?
Yeah.
Was there a fair degree of improv in the film from the actors, or did Martin like to stick pretty close to the script that he wrote?
I think the only impro is from the animals. I think he sticks very, very much to his script. Probably there's like ideas that could come up, but he knows what he wants for sure. But then you have the possibility of the tonality or the balance in the thing, the tension. Should it be light all the way through a scene? Should it also get darker? And I like that because that gives you the option to play around with it afterwards. And it's interesting how much everything changes when you suddenly start working with the scene and you mold it and it gets tighter and tighter. And then suddenly it just clicks.
Up to this point, I've asked you questions mostly about story because that's what fascinates me the most about a film that I really enjoy. But I should ask you some things about your process as well. And generally where I start with those is, once you sat down with Martin at a restaurant, you said, I love your script. He says, great, I'd love you to do the movie. What do you do next after that to prepare? What do you do to get ready to begin editing this big project?
Well, first of all, I try to see if I can get out of me having to show anything during production. So Nicola, my assistant, would do the assembly for them on set if they needed to see anything. And I would I never watched any of that. I would just basically focus on working on the scenes. I don't start editing for a very long time. I look at material and I put it like in an order. And while I'm doing that, I'm probably editing in my head. And I'm putting a lot of the lines, for example, after each other, all the takes, so you can hear and really feel and sense the difference and play them very fast after each other so you can see them right after each other so you can feel and see what does it do that he delivers the line a little bit more soft, a little more hard, a little more, what does it do? And then you have like wides and mediums and close-ups after each other. And I probably do that almost on everything. And then after 2 or 3 weeks of just putting material after each other, looking at it, I start editing. I don't really think at all. It's more about the natural way of putting things together. And mostly it would probably be on the character that speaks all the time. And if there's multiple people, then I would do like a few passes on it. First, everyone that speaks, and then I would bring in all the other characters that are looking. And then I would always have music or a library of music, which I'm always been like doing a playlist of different emotions or feelings. And while I'm putting things together, I have this playing somehow on the back. And then sometimes you just have a sense that this material clicks with this feeling of music or emotion. And I would try it on, see what it does. And given that Martin and I really didn't talk about the film, because I know, and I've done it many times now, that the first assembly is pure structure and story. Let's see what we have. I would never take anything out. I would always put everything together as it's supposed to be. But that doesn't mean that it's right what I'm doing, because they could have an idea, Martin could have an idea on set, which I never really got. So I put it one way and I show it. And sometimes the director would be like, well, definitely not the intention, but that's interesting. Or it would be like, no, it has to be like this and this and this, but at least we've seen it this way. So I would do a pass on the whole film, and I would also add some music, different types of music, and I would play the whole film for Martin. And that was actually the second time we met or talked. I showed him, I don't know how long the version was, maybe 2 hours 30 or so. And I think the film is 149 or 148 now.
We talked early on about Ireland being such a big component of the film.
Yeah.
Were you interested at all in working on location just to sort of help absorb that aspect of Ireland as a character, or do you always prefer to be remote?
No, I mean, there's probably pros and cons for everything. But given the backstory of this whole thing, I was brought in right when they started shooting, and it was the circumstances that simply, if I was to do it, I wouldn't be able to sit on set doing it, basically, because it came like very fast. And I started after our talk, I started like a week later. And they had shot maybe 4 days or so, or 5 days at that time, when we had our meeting the first time. Normally, I think I would go on set. But it's also about how do you spend your time the best way, right? And is that to sit and make production happy or producers happy if we have the material? Because often I have the issue that I don't really know what I like before very late in the process. And I actually try and keep not having any kind of opinion until as late as possible in the process, because it gives me the way to try things and to be open to new ways. I mean, there's no right and wrong, and a story can be told in many, many different ways. So if I can stay as objective for as long as possible, it would be the best way. I showed Martin a full pass of the whole film. I mean, that's actually where I had the most difficult time the week before that, because I knew I entered like I had never tried this before. And I also knew that Martin has tried it before and with Jon Gregory. And I don't know about their process. And I didn't know about normally how they work or what they did. So I didn't know what he expected, which is kind of my own fault, because I said that, well, I'll just do a pass and then we can start set there. And they were like, okay, that's what we'll do then. So I think I wrote him an email or text or something like a few days before, said like, well, I hope you know that we have to work a lot on this, and I don't know what you expect, but I really hope that it's good enough for what we're doing. And luckily he was like, well, he had never seen anything he liked yet, because he knows the process. It's probably like writing, actually, that like you have a lot of ideas and you put them down, and then you start to find the language or something. I don't know how writers work, but the idea is there, but you have to find everything and make it like smoothen it out and find the characters. So I showed the whole thing, and I don't remember if he watched it like once or twice, and he really liked it, the idea and the pace and the rhythm. Also a lot of obviously not I didn't use the exact takes that he liked, and these are things that you have to find, or the nuances in the characters, but those were the things that we would then start the day after and like, okay, let's go. And then we went like scene by scene by scene by scene by scene. But because I had done all that work previously, like the select process, for me, it's very easy to show the difference in the tone, and we could try all these things and try them very fast. So we actually had like a pass after like 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, this is not a film that you would associate with a lot of visual effects, but you can't help but notice this beautiful rainbow that appears by Pádraic, Colin Farrell's character, at the beginning of the movie. That had to be a visual effect, right? That was just too perfect.
So the thing is that it's so perfect because it's right.
Really?
It was there.
Well, that's a good sign for this movie.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a good start for a character, right? You see a character walking with a rainbow in the back, and you're like,
Oh, the luck of the Irish. If there were any visual effects, where do they apply on such a sparse film of this nature?
I mean, there's a lot of VFX shots, but it's mostly matte paintings and period accurate stuff, like removing buildings and adding buildings and stuff like that on the island. And then obviously there's this thing that Colm does to himself, which we needed to help him with.
I saw the film in the theater with a paying audience. I paid. I was very happy to pay. And I'm happy to say that it was a very full theater. And it was not like, Friday night at 8:00. It was sort of an off hour. So I think that's a great sign for cinema and a great sign for this film that there are audiences that want to go out and experience this collectively. And it was a great film to see with an audience because of what you talked about with the comedy and the tension and relief and all that stuff. You mentioned doing screenings. Were there any things that you learned from the screenings that made you alter the film in any way?
Yes. I mean, some of the things were like character-wise. It was to try and find the balance of the characters. I mean, you start one screening and then the first pass, then it's one of the characters are like very present, because it's little by little. It's like, and it's also like taking every character through the film step by step, like one pass with the Dominic, one pass with Siobhan, one pass with the Pádraic, one pass, and then little by little they start to become these characters and real people. And then at some point everything is right, and then we look for the small things where it becomes also very human, like pauses and how much should he look and how long should we stay on his eyes, or the two of them looking at each other, and the sadness. And we learned, I mean, it's mostly like rhythm, I would say, from my chair. You sense an audience, and if you sit in a cinema, and it can be 10 people, 6 people, 20 people, 40 people, whatever it is, you just sense if they lose interest or if they laugh, for instance, in this film, how long and when are they ready for us starting up again? Maybe it's too much to laugh twice. Maybe it's not the right way to deliver the line. Maybe so these things we would try on, and we would try exploring how far can you take it. Obviously also music. Less is more again. How much do we need? Do we need like music to help a scene, to make it darker, lighter, whatever it is? All these things we tried and we played around with for sure. And then, of course, when you start the bigger screenings, it's also about, do you understand it? Is it too Irish? Do British people understand? Do American people understand it? How much do you understand? Do you get like 80%, 90%, 100%? How do you end the movie? How do you start it? All these things.
Well, I know it's getting to be dinner time in Denmark, so I won't keep you much longer.
No, it's fine.
Dinner Time in Denmark sounds like a great play.
Yeah.
But I would like to know, for a film for which you should be very proud anyway, whether it's a scene or something that you did on the film or just something about the job itself that you are most proud of.
First of all, I'm very honored and proud of the movie itself to be brought in to try and work on such a thing, because it's a very special, it's a special film. And I also think that it's a very, I can see how it affects people and how people react to it. And also for Martin and for the whole setting and the whole idea to bring life into this project. That I'm very proud of the whole animal work on the film, how the animals play a big part, how they stay sane.
Jenny the donkey, she stole the show.
Jenny the donkey is amazing, but editors who work with animals know how difficult it is to get it to make it work, because it's like these small things, but I hope it feels completely natural. I hope that the idea is that you don't sense the editing, that you just go with the story and you're being brought into this world, and then suddenly it's over and you almost forgot about time and place. You were just sucked into these characters and you're filled with so many emotions, this or this way. Then at least I feel I have done a good job. But also, if I feel that we have explored things enough, I mean, the worst thing is that people come and say, like, why didn't you try this? Why didn't the character do this? And you're like, why didn't I try that? And I actually feel that we had so much time that we did explore a lot of things. And we did have time to sit and talk about, is this the right thing to do? I hope Martin is very proud of the film, because I think it's a beautiful piece of work from his hand, both as a director, but also as a scriptwriter. And the actors are like amazing. I think Siobhan is absolutely incredible in it. I know that Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, they're really good, but also Dominic Barry Cuban, he's just like such a wonderful young actor that I cannot wait to see what else comes from this guy, because he has this sensitive way of, you almost like you're in love with him. I played around with this idea. Yeah, I played with this idea that I really wanted to adopt him, almost like bring him back in my family. No, and obviously it's for fun, but I actually did tell myself like, because then you see your characters as real humans, and that was the idea. And then, I mean, you also just want people to have fun and to laugh and to surprise them and to shock them. And I really think that it does that, but it has its completely own. I mean, it's difficult to compare it to anything.
No question. And I think anybody with their name in the credits on this film should be proud, whether it's you or Martin or Colin or any of the actors. There's so much to be proud of. You know that I'm a big fan of your work, certainly Sound of Metal and now Banshees.
Thank you so much.
And I feel like as one of your big fans, I knew everything about you, and yet I stumbled across this one thing that I'm just going to have to ask.
Yeah.
Mikkel, are you responsible for cutting Barbie Girl by the pop band Aqua?
How do you know that?
News gets around, and an infectious tune like Barbie Girl certainly gets into the public consciousness. I couldn't believe when I saw editor Mikkel Nielsen, the Barbie Girl video for Aqua.
Yeah, that was a younger version of Mikkel. Yes, that's true. It's very different from Banshees, though. But maybe...
From Barbie Girl to Oscar Gold, the story of Mikkel Nielsen. What an adventure.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, I am a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. From Danish pop video editor to Oscar-winning film editor. That is quite a journey for Mikkel. Who knows where his journey will lead next? Perhaps another Oscar. Only time will tell. Please join me in thanking Mikkel for talking with us today about the Banshees of Inisherin. It's quite a story, and Mikkel is quite an editor. Please do not forget that, as we reach the end of this year, it's the time to give stuff to people, including ourselves. Why not? We're people. So give the gift of Media Composer, whether it's to you or the editor you love. And if you head on over to avid.com, there may be a season of giving promo in effect. I will put a link in the show notes that'll take you right on over to the special offers page, and you can see for yourself. Hey, I got a special offer for you. If you subscribe to The Rough Cut, I can make sure that almost every week you get a new episode for free. What a bargain. You can thank me later. No, wait, thank me now and make sure you're subscribed. And when your friends aren't looking, grab their phones and subscribe them too. They won't even notice, and I'd be so grateful. All right, that'll do it for today. Until next time, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.